throughout the Episcopal Church, and particularly in this diocese, this last week we've been remembering the life of Absalom Jones. And some of you may have heard of Absalom Jones, some of you may not. Absalom was the first African-American Episcopal priest. And his story is really a remarkable one. Absalom was a slave in Delaware in the 1700s. And his master moved him to Philadelphia, where he bought his way out of slavery, and his wife as well. Even though he was a freed slave, he still obviously worked for the colonial white folks of Philadelphia at that time. And at one moment, him and his other compatriots were praying together at St. George's Methodist Church on 4th Street down in Old City. And in that time, there was segregation in the pews even. So if you were black, you were up in the balcony, out of sight. If you're white, you're down on the floor. Some of his friends decided that they wanted to pray at the altar rail. You know, think of those old days when you had the altar rail around the altar. So some of his friends came down to the altar rail and started praying. That's what you kind of do in church, I guess. It's pray. The elders of that church came up to Absalom and his friends and said, "How dare you desecrate this church by your presence?" Absalom got up and said, "As soon as we're done with this prayer, we'll have no need of you or us, of you. Walk away." And that's that. At that moment, Absalom Jones and Frank Allen, who was his friend, decided that this was not the place they're supposed to be, where they weren't even respected as human beings, where they couldn't even pray at the same altar. So they decided that they needed to take a different step. Richard Allen went off into finding the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church. Mother Bethel, which is down by South Street, is the first church of their denomination. And Absalom Jones, in turn, went to the Episcopal Church, where he was ordained a deacon and finally a priest in 1802. The story of these people, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, I think speaks really to what our gospel is talking about today. And this is the continuation of the Sermon on the Mount. And most of the time when we hear the Sermon on the Mount, we think the Beatitudes, or these really were salt and light, like we heard last week. But this is not the happy part of the Sermon on the Mount. And I know it makes some of us squeamish. And that's unfortunate, and we'll kind of unpack that today. Some scripture scholars call this part the antithesis of Jesus, where you hear one thing, and Jesus says, "No, do this. This is one thing, no, do that." But I think really what's going on here is what Jesus is trying to say is how often we use religion and manipulate it to fit our needs. How often we use Scripture to fit our needs. When taking pieces out of the Bible doesn't do what the Bible was meant to do. For those of us who went to seminary, that's called proof texting. You ever come to adult ed, I always caution us about this. When we see someone flipping back and forth from the Bible, flipping pages, taking out a sentence here and a sentence there, that is completely wrong and not how the Bible is supposed to be read. It's supposed to be read as a story, the Spirit inspired through people, human people, with lots of faults, failures, and prejudices, in a historical context. It's not supposed to be where you lift things out. In the case of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, it was how slavery was proven through the Bible. Segregation was proven by the Bible. But you can see that for so many other things. War, exclusion, oppression of women, oppression of LGBT folks, on and on and on, destruction of the environment. People pull randomly weird verses out to prove their agenda versus proving God's agenda. And I think this is what Jesus is trying to tell us today. So we hear various things: don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't lust, don't steal, don't lie. But Jesus, in the eyes of the lawgiver, again, I said last week how Jesus in Matthew's gospel, Jesus is the new Moses. And the Sermon on the Mount is the new Mount Sinai. And the Beatitudes are the new commandments. That we are called to a higher level of commitment. And it's not just about don't do this, don't do that. It's more about why are you in relationship with these people? And why are you doing this? And it's about loving God and about loving your neighbor. And these details that sometimes we like to pull out are unnecessary. Because if you truly respect that individual and truly love them, you won't inflict burdens and rules that cause people to be divided or broken down even more. And I think this is something in our modern day we have to be extremely, extremely careful about. I see it all the time where people pervert the gospel and pervert Jesus himself for their own self-interest. And as Christians, we need to reclaim Jesus. We need to reclaim the gospel, not for some ego or some political party, but for Jesus himself and for the church himself. And that requires us to go deeper and deeper in our study and our prayer of the Bible. I think one of the most dangerous things that go on out there is because people sometimes just know a little bit of Bible and makes them slightly dangerous. Because they can pull a verse here or a verse there. But really, in this piece of the gospel we're hearing this Sunday, Jesus asks us to go deeper, to challenge ourselves that murder isn't just killing someone. Lying is not just lying. Lusting is not just lusting. It's much more complicated. But in other ways, it's much more simple. So we need to delve deeper in our understanding of who Jesus is. A collective vision, a holistic vision of the Scripture. We have to delve deeper in what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It's not about checking boxes of things not to do, but rather it's about things to do, things to be. And we have to take the words of our Lord back and protect them and guard them from people who will pervert them. It's all over the place, folks. The gospel of inclusion turns into the gospel of exclusion. The gospel of peace turns into the gospel of war. The gospel of embracing the poor and the vulnerable turns into the gospel of prosperity and the powerful. We have to protect and stand up for the gospel message. So if there's one thing I always ask people to do is take your faith seriously. Wrestle with it. Challenge yourself with it. Challenge other people with it. And just like Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, sometimes you have to stand up and walk away from things that we know not to be true. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones had the courage to say that slavery and segregation was not a Christian virtue. We need to have that same courage, that same conviction of faith. So that sometimes when we see things where Christianity is awry, we have the right to stand up